Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I'll be showing you how to make this cute baby doll crop top for summertime. This is an intermediate project made super easy so anyone can follow it, and it's made specially for my 100 subscriber special. Thank you all so much. The pattern will be listed along with the video, and also if this helps you, please leave me a like and subscribe for new videos every Tuesday. At the end of this video, there will be a short announcement, so please stick around till then, and good luck creating! Please pause to take screenshots of these directions. As per usual, these steps will still be listed in the corner of the video, but I always think it helps to be able to follow along with this. Because of the nature of the shirt, I also think it's really helpful to have a couple different sources to look at as the video goes on. It'll help clear up the directions to use both of these resources together. For materials, you'll need two different color yarns, one of a weight 4 and one of a just lightweight, a 4mm hook, some scissors, and a tape measure. And then if you prefer to use darning needles and stitch markers, keep them on hand, but I don't use them. For part 1 of this video, I'll be showing you how to make the cups. The best part about these cups is that they can actually transfer from like any sort of top you want to make, but for this one specifically, I'll be showing you exactly what I do to make the cup for this top. You want to start by measuring from the very bottom of your underbust to about the middle of where the cup will come up. That's the grounds for which we're going to build the cup itself, so make sure you get as accurate as possible with this measurement. For me, I end up chaining 11 to match my measurement, but what you're going to be doing is whatever number you come up with. You'll start this project off with a slip knot. We'll be using no magic rings for the entirety of making this top, so make your slip knot and then chain whatever length you just came up with. Also important to keep in mind for the whole video, sometimes it helps to do slightly more chains or slightly less chains than what you've measured, so just keep that in mind and be prepared to change anything as you're going. I also recommend taking an old cup or an old bra or whatever you have to measure up against it the way I'm doing here, so that way you know your measurement is as accurate as possible. For row 1, you are going to be single crocheting into each and every one of these stitches on this row, and then you're going to be doing it in the back stitches of the row as well. This is why I want to make sure everyone pays attention to the video portion. It's a little bit hard to understand exactly what I'm talking about in the directions, so please keep an eye on what I'm doing here as you're reading. So you'll be single crocheting down this entire row, and when you get to this last stitch before switching to the back stitches, you want to make sure there's 3 single crochets in there. This is what's going to form that point at the very top, as opposed to having like a weird square or triangle. It'll make it so it's almost this like curved sides up to the point of the cup itself. So like I said, crochet all the way to the last stitch, add 2 more so that way there's 3 single crochets in that final top stitch, and then we'll be single crocheting into the back as well. Also, whenever you feel like you've lost your place, you can always just count your stitches just like I showed you there. From here, if you don't want to weave in ends later, I recommend lining up the yarn tail like I'm doing, making sure you tuck it over your hook, so when you begin your single crocheting into the back of these stitches, it'll end up being encompassed within the stitches themselves. Again though, I just don't like using darning needles. If you do like using them, you can just leave a longer tail and weave in your ends that way afterwards. For now, single crochet into these back stitches, and then at the end of this row, you're going to chain 1. If you don't feel like counting 10 stitches up and down, make sure that you don't skip these last stitches here. That one's a bit harder to see, so just make sure when you're done, you have that straight line. That straight line part of this cup is what will be on the bottom, the curved line is what will be on the top. From row 2 onwards, you're going to repeat the exact same thing you did in row 1. You'll be single crocheting all the way up, putting 3 into that top stitch, and then going all the way down, chaining 1 and turning your work. I use 9 rows, this will change for you. After the 9 rows that I did, you end up with this size cup. It's somewhere between a small B or a larger A cup. I recommend obviously changing this to whatever you need. Don't just blindly follow the exact amount that I did. For your final row, you're going to be doing a color change, and then you're going to be adding those little frills like you can see on the other cup next to mine. Switch colors. I recommend here that you trim your yarn first, so that way you don't have to worry about that cream getting in the way. And now switching to whatever your accent color yarn is. If you chained 1 at the end of your final row, undo that chain and now replace it by pulling the second color through. Doing this acts not only as just the chained 1 for the end of the row, but also will really smoothly change colors so you don't end up with like a weird line of cream yarn or whatever your main color was. Pull the other 2 yarn tails taut and then begin to single crochet 3 into each stitch. Crocheting 3 into every stitch of the row Makes it so that way you end up with that frilly pattern since the yarn can't lay flat anymore. It's too crowded. Note that in the top stitch where you've been putting 3 single crochets, you're now going to be putting 5 in there for this row just to keep it proportional. Also be a bit adventurous if you feel like it, and only do your single crochets into the backs of each single crochet stitch. So if you watch where I insert my hook, I'm going in behind the stitch rather than through the whole thing. This is totally optional and you do not need to do it this way. I just think it gives you a little bit of oomph and pizzazz as opposed to just going straight through. I'm also continuing to weave in my ends like this, making sure they go over the hook so they get tucked in, but you can still just weave them in however you normally would do so. This is just the way that appeals the most to me. If you're a beginner and you're just learning though, I really do recommend this over using a darning needle because it really strengthens the bond that the yarn has together and it has a much higher chance of not coming undone. Also, don't mind Perry, he shouldn't be in the way of what I'm doing too much, but if you can't see exactly what I'm doing here, just make sure you follow the directions or just rewatch what I told you a second ago. At the end of this row, you're going to chain 1, and then you'll cut your yarn so that way we can make the little knot to end this part of the piece. To end a row, I just cut the yarn and pull it straight through with the hook, and that will create a nice little baby knot. From here, you can line up your 2 cups to make sure they're pretty much the exact same size. If they're a little different because your tension is off, no worries, but they should be about the same. For part 2 of this piece, I'm going to show you how to measure up against your own body. It's easiest to take your underbust measurement now, along with the measurement for your waist, the measurement for the straps of your top, and also however tall or short you want your top to be. Taking these all now and writing them down will just save you a little bit of time later, since you'll need every measurement to finish this part of the top. Another way of doing this is to just find a bra top or bikini top that fits you already and taking some of these measurements there. Start the body itself, you'll need to take the underbust measurement that you just did and subtract about 2 inches to make up for the stretching of the yarn. So divide that number by 2, which is where in this giant chain that I'll show you how to make, you want your cups to meet. Following along with the tape measure this time, line up your cups with the measurement of your underbust first. I'm folding the tape measure in half and that's my middle point. This is where we want to align our cups. You're then going to want to create your slip knot so that way we can begin to make this giant connecting chain. If you see that length before where the first cup starts, which is about 1 inches to 9 inches on my end, that's the length that you're just going to do a plain old chain. Of course, that number will change from me to you, so do whatever you need to, but for me it ends up being about 40 chains. If your number is drastically different than that, and it's not because you have a larger or more smaller bust size, it's usually because you've overestimated or underestimated, so try to stay within that range. I recommend taking this chain that you just made and lining it up right against the tape measure to make sure it's the length that you need it to be. Once you know that your chain length is exactly the way you want it, we'll begin to connect the cup to this chain. The goal of this is to very evenly, without scrunching up the cup, slip stitch it together with this chain so we can connect it into one giant piece to build the body of the top with. Depending on however many rows you use to make this cup is about how many stitches you'll need to slip stitch it to the chain. Remember correctly, I used 9 rows for mine, which about doubled is 18 or 20 slip stitches. Sure, whatever you do for the first cup, you're also doing for the second cup, so write it down as you go through. I line up the cup by flipping it this way with the flat side pointing up, and then I insert my hook directly into the first cream stitch of this cup. Be careful not to go through any of the purple, frillies, or whatever color it was that you used, so that way you're not bending the frills. These slip stitches are incredibly easy. You insert your hook like so, pull the yarn through, and then pull it straight through the other loop without yarning over it all. This method creates a nice flat base, but also connects the piece without elongating it at all. May take some getting used to if you've never done this before to find exactly where to insert your hook. That part doesn't really matter so long as you have enough of these slip stitches on the piece. Tip I recommend though is, and I'll use mine as an example, if you made 9 rows and you've doubled it to about 18 or 20, make sure that by the time you get to the middle of this cup that you have maybe 9 on one side or 10 on one side, and then the exact same amount on the other side. When you're done, we'll need to connect both of these cups together. This depends on how wide set your chest area is. I'm doing 1 chain in between, but if you have a bigger bust, you might need to do upwards of like 5 chains. You'll start again by lining up these pieces the exact same way as the other one, so with the top part facing up, and then you'll just do your chain 1 or however many chains you need to make this fit you. Make sure this chain is on its own, freestanding, without doing any slip stitches. You just need that for the 1, and then we'll begin to slip stitch again. The most important thing here is to make sure that you do the exact same amount of slip stitches on both cups. This will prevent anything from folding in on itself, and it'll make sure that everything is totally even as you go to do the rest of your top below it. Once you're done with that, you'll do the exact same amount of chains that you did before. It was 40 for me, so that might change for you. Just make sure it's about the exact same. This will ensure that your top is even all the way around, since this is one giant circle once you're putting it together. Speaking of the circle, you'll want to line up your ends like this, making sure that everything is flat and not curved over itself. From there, you'll slip stitch into the end of the first starting chain that you did, making sure again that your piece looks a bit like mine, regardless of how much bigger or smaller it is, just in terms of the shape. Showing you how to make sure these lay out flat so that way your piece doesn't curve over itself, and once it's all even, you'll slip stitch through the 2 of those and chain 2 right afterwards. My opinion, that was the hardest part of the whole project, so if you could do that, you can make the rest of this easy peasy. For row 2 of the body, you'll begin to double crochet 1 time into each one of these chain stitches we made. Make sure that you're not forgetting to insert 1 double crochet into that starting hole here. It'll be a bit hard to finesse it through, but once you do, it'll make sure that your piece doesn't decrease on accident. If you've never double crocheted before, simply do what I just did, yarn over, insert your hook through, then yarn over again, pull through 2 loops, and pull through 2 more loops. If it's hard to see here and you've never done it before, I do have a video on the basics of crochet that I recommend you check out. When you get to this corner piece of the cup, make sure you don't skip any of them there, and very carefully insert your hook through each and every one of those chains. Make sure you remember that number that you did earlier. For me, like I said, it was 20, so you're only double crocheting that same amount that you did the first time. If that number changes, it'll increase or decrease and it won't fit you anymore. Once you've made it all the way around like this, we'll connect each of these 2 pieces with a slip stitch. First, make sure that nothing is folded over. It'll be a lot easier to tell here than it was earlier. And now flip your piece back together so you can do your slip stitch of these 2 pieces. It might be a bit tricky to find where that first double crochet that we made was, but if you lay out your piece, you should be able to find the hole pretty simply. I also recommend making sure that you do not skip any of these chains, just because you don't want your piece to decrease when it's not ready. Find your first double crochet by pulling apart those pieces very gently, then inserting through and pulling through both pieces of yarn. You'll want to chain 2 afterwards to finish off the second row. For our third row, we're going to add a cute accent window effect in between each of these stitches. You'll chain 1 extra, and then you'll skip that stitch that I pointed out and double crochet into the one afterwards. This is what makes that little window effect. The pattern you'll continue to follow, you'll need to chain 1, make a double crochet, but skip the following stitch and go into the one after it like this. Skipping that stitch creates that little square, and then you have a cute little accent window. A big mistake that I see is people forgetting to do that chain and just skipping across. That will cause a bunch of decreases and will totally affect the size of your top. So don't forget to do that chain in between. This is another great stitch to just know as you're learning to crochet. It makes a really cute accent in a ton of different pieces, and it's one that will show off your skills as you get better. At the end of this row, make sure that you chain 1 before doing your slip stitch, so that way we make sure that we have that last little window. Also, avoid chaining into that extra chain 1 we did in the very beginning. Just go into the second one so you don't ruin the first window we made. You'll then chain 2, and you'll be done with row 3. At this point, if you're a beginner, you've likely now learned 2 new type of stitches here with that frilly stitch and the window, so be a little proud of yourself, celebrate. For row 4, you're going to double crochet all the way around, and before you do your slip stitch at the end, I will show you how to do a color switch into a slip stitch. It's important in this row that you don't forget to do your double crochets into the chain stitches that we made. It's very easy to look at the double crochets that we had prior to this, but sometimes it's easy to miss that sort of chain. So look carefully at it the same way I did, and then double crochet into that as well. It is very important to avoid decreasing at this point, and I really want to drill that home, so please do this very slowly and very carefully so that way you don't miss any chains that you had made in the row prior. But the row itself is simple, just double crocheting until you reach the end. To do a color changing slip stitch, You are fundamentally doing a normal slip stitch, just switching the yarn. Start by inserting your hook the way you normally would, but rather than using that first color to pull through, you want to re-grab that other accent color and pull through with that instead. Starting color, the cream for me, and pull it taut so that way nothing comes undone. You should also be trying to use your middle finger or your ring finger to hold that new color in place so you don't accidentally pull it. Cut the color that you use first, like so, and if you're not going to be using a darning needle, you can make it super short so you can just weave your ends in the way I do it here. Leave it longer if you're going to sew it in with a darning needle. From here, you'll do your chain 2 as you've been doing, and now you're going to double crochet all the way around. What makes this row a little bit different than the rows that we did previously is that row 5 will have decreases every 10 stitches. Start by double crocheting 10 stitches, and I won't speed up the video because I want to show you exactly what to do here without making any mistakes or getting confused. The properties of a decreasing stitch can be a little confusing if you've never done it before, so it's important to really pay attention and make sure also that you're counting each and every stitch and not just eyeballing where you think every 10 is. We're doing these decreases to get a similar feel to where your rib cage starts to shrink for your waist. This is because it looks a little bit nicer than just having the shirt flow really frilly on top of you. Also, if you notice in the video me redoing a stitch here and there, it's because this lightweight yarn that I use is super loose and sometimes it comes undone pretty easily. So don't worry if yours doesn't look exactly like mine. That's totally going to be dependent on the accent yarn that you use. If you're a bit more experienced, I think a mohair yarn might look a little bit nicer than the one that I'm using here, but of course that part is entirely up to you. Now that we have our 10 double crochets, I will show you how to insert your decreased stitch. Stitch itself is just another double crochet, but it's the way that you insert it that makes it a decrease. Push it through, and then rather than instantly yarn over, push it through the next hole as well. Then you'll pull through both of those holes and continue your double crochet. I'm going to show you this one more time, so double crochet another 10, then you'll yarn over, insert it through the stitch like this, insert it through the next stitch through the back, pull over, and continue your double crochet as normal. Slow down the video if you need to see that again, but it'll help to practice over and over. At the end, you're just going to slip stitch normally, finding that first hole and pushing through, pulling through both. Then you'll chain 2, and we're going to do one more row of those decreases. Once you've completed row 6, you will slip stitch this row shut as well. However, I want to add that if you need your shirt to be longer or if you want it tighter, you can continue doing decrease rows here. I'm just going to now be switching to a normal double crochet row for row 7. This is just a super simple row. You're double crocheting around and then slip stitching to finish up your row. Point can get a bit time consuming, but it will be worth it for the finished product. You should be a pro at the slip stitch at this point, but I do like showing it to you so you don't lose your spot in the video. Find that first double crochet that you made, insert and pull through, and then do your chain 2 to finish row 7. Row 8 will be pretty much the exact same thing, and here you can see me measuring to make sure that I'm on track with how long I want my shirt to be. I recommend you do so as well, but double crochet around for row 8, and then at the end of it we're going to be doing another color changing slip stitch. Same as the way you did it before. Insert your hook like you're going to slip stitch with this color, and then pull out your main color and pull it through. Since you should be using a lightweight yarn as your accent color, it might be a bit tricky to color switch with this one. Just be very gentle as you go so you don't pull anything too tight. Cut that accent yarn, and again be ready to weave in those 2 tails whichever way you want. You don't need as long as a tail as what I had there, so shorten it if you need to, and then do your chain 2 so you can start row 9. Row 9 might take you a bit, but it is very simple. You'll be inserting 3 double crochets into each and every one of these stitches. If you remember when we made the cups, you did almost the exact same thing, inserting those single crochets into the ends for that frilly border. That is exactly what we're doing here, just using double crochets now instead of single, and we're going to be using it for a much different purpose. Adding these double crochets is not just going to make that frilly effect, but it's going to make it so the top itself has little ruffles as you begin to elongate it later. At the end of that row, you'll find where you started and do your simple little slip stitch. No color changing here, we're going to stick with this main color for a bit longer. You'll chain 2 here, and then for the next however many rows you want, depending on how long you want your top, you're just going to double crochet all the way across. I want this to be super cropped, so I'm only doing 1 double crochet row, but you can have upwards of 5 or 6 if you want a nice full length top. At the end, you'll slip stitch again, And no matter how many rows you did, your final row will just have one chain as opposed to 2 at the end. For your final main color row, you're just going to be doing single crochets instead of double crochets all the way around. This doesn't have a technical purpose, but rather it just looks a little bit more finished. It's almost like having a hem. When you get to the end of that row, you will slip stitch into it like so, and then we're going to be color switching back to the accent color to make the final row of the body. Again, you should be a pro at this point. Pull your second color through both of these, and then you'll do a chain 1. You can cut the yarn wherever you want it to be, and then make sure you weave in your ends. For the final row, you're just going to be doing 2 single crochets into each and every one of the last row. Doing 2 single crochets as opposed to 1 or 3, because we don't want the whole thing to be frilly at the bottom. We just want it to elongate that cute little ruffle effect that you should see at this point. Of course, if you want to change it and end up having a frillier look, you can do 3 single crochets instead of 2, but I will just be doing 2 for mine. I think it comes out the cleanest when the top is set and done. At the end of this row, you'll find your first single crochet and slip stitch into there, and then this time there's no color switching or anything, just slip stitch it shut, chain 1, and then you'll cut your work and pull through to create a knot the same way we did with the cups. If you were weaving in your ends the whole time like I was, you should only have to weave this one in manually. If you were not, you'll need to go through your whole piece with your darning needle and weave in all of your ends at once. From here, the body of the top will be complete, and yours should look very similar to mine, of course with whatever height differences you made. For part 3 of this video, I'm going to show you how to make cute little spaghetti straps for your top. This is extremely easy. You'll be starting with a slip knot and then attaching that slip knot to the back of the cups. Going 1 cup at a time, because you will need to repeat this on the other side, you'll insert your slip knot onto your hook and then push it through the very top of your cup. Make this even, make sure it is lined up directly with the middle, and you can even pull it apart like this to find that middle stitch you put into the top stitch. As you put that through, you're going to want to make a little slip stitch so that way it's like knotting the slip knot to the piece itself. From there, you're going to chain the length that you measured earlier. Again, you can subtract it a little bit to make up for the amount of stretching the yarn does. Want to attach this to the back of your piece, lining them up like so to make sure you go directly into the middle. From here, you'll want to slip stitch it to connect, and I apologize for being off screen a little bit, I wasn't paying attention. Make sure you insert it through the back and pull through like this. After you slip stitch through once, you'll want to go right next to it and do 1 single crochet so that way you can start off row 2. If you want your piece to be thicker, you can continue doing these steps up and down each row. I'm only doing 2 rows because I want spaghetti straps. So insert your single crochet directly next to where your slip stitch was, and then turn your work to begin to single crochet into each one of those chains. This part is super easy. You should be a professional single crocheter at this point, and now you just want to go all the way down the row right up until we get to where the cup starts. Make sure you're not skipping any chains or these straps won't be the same length. Once you're done with that row and you're back at the cup here, you want to make sure that you are attaching it to the cup like this, pulling a single crochet through once, and then even pulling through a second time with a slip stitch, so that way we can do a chain 1. You do that chain here, so that way you can cut your yarn and make the knot, and from that point on, you are pretty much done. Weave in your ends however you see fit, and then make sure you repeat the exact same thing you did with this strap on the other side of your bag. Since these couldn't be weaved in the way I normally do, I did save them to the end to make sure I pull them all through with my hook. Once you've done that, you have completed your top. Congratulations, and thank you for following along with me. If this video helped you, please do not forget to like and share the video, and subscribe for new content every Tuesday afternoon. For that announcement earlier, please follow me on Instagram and Depop and partake in my summer sale, which is going up now. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.